I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show.
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
CJ, it is silly season. Rumors and trade talk and speculation running wild and rampant. The CJ Show, of course, is the place to clear through all the mush and get to what's right. I have a list of players I would love to know what you're hearing on them. And we're going to start with a player we kind of casually mentioned at the end of last episode, and you ended up writing something on him for The Athletic. What are you hearing right now about Edmonton Oilers forward Leon Draisaitl?
Well, it's certainly the biggest piece of business Edmonton has to take care of this summer after, their Game 7 loss in the Stanley Cup. Maybe could become one of the biggest storylines in the NHL. I think that depends on how things play out. And really the situation is this: Leon Draisaitl is eligible for unrestricted free agency next summer. That means he's eligible to sign an extension in Edmonton as of Monday, July 1st. And I think depending on how things materialize here, this could turn into a situation where Edmonton's perhaps having to look at trading him. And so, at this point, look, the champagne still hasn't dried in the dressing room down in Florida where the Panthers won that series. Edmonton just flew back home Tuesday. They're doing some exit meetings this week. I mean, they're not in a spot where they've dug into this one just yet. But, Leon Draisaitl holds all the cards here. It's no mystery it won't become as a surprise to you to learn that the Oilers badly want to keep the number 2 player on the roster behind Connor McDavid. I think that they're willing to extend themselves pretty far financially to do it. It's up to him whether he wants to explore those contract discussions now or not. And so this looms as a massive storyline, I think, either way, because from what I can gather, Julian, I don't get the sense that Edmonton has much appetite to walk him into his final year if he is reluctant this summer to sign a contract extension. It's not to say there's no chance they would do that, but I don't think it's their preference to do that. Just because, this time next year we'll be having the same discussion about Connor McDavid. And I think there is some sensitivity to the possibility if you leave things unresolved with Draisaitl and you go in all again next year, then next summer there's a world where maybe he's walking away for nothing. And then you've got to try to convince Connor McDavid it's a good idea for him to lock in long term. Whereas if Draisaitl, and I really have to stress, this is an if, these discussions haven't got going yet because the season only ended on June 24th for the Oilers late at night on the other part of the continent. And so there hasn't really been an opportunity to get into these sort of discussions at a high level. But, if Draisaitl isn't looking to stay right now or sign some kind of extension, I think they have to explore the trade market. He does have a limited no trade clause rather, but there is an ability for them to trade him to half the league. And, if he's not sure he wants to stay, I think the Oilers have to do everything they can to get the best assets back to convince Connor McDavid a year from now that even in a world that could include not Leon Draisaitl as his teammate, that there's a path for him to still win a championship and keep that window open in Edmonton. And so, at this stage, we're kind of framing where things might go and what might happen, but, there's just not tangible enough information or action yet to dictate where this goes. But my goodness, the fact that it kind of hangs so quickly after the season, I'll say this: the NHL schedule maker did neither the Florida Panthers nor the Edmonton Oilers any favors by having a cup that goes to June 24th, because, quite naturally, their focus has been all on what's happening on the ice, giving themselves a chance to chase a championship, even one team that wins one. And now there's some big business decisions that have to come in a matter of days. And, meanwhile, most of the rest of the league is already well into its planning. And quite frankly, I think it's tampering season around the NHL. I think there's a lot of free agent deals already baked in, whereas teams like Edmonton and Florida obviously just haven't been able to do that kind of business because they've been focused on the games they've been playing until this week.
I can totally understand if you don't have an answer to this question yet, but do you have any sense on where Leon Draisaitl and his camp might be leaning towards in this situation, whether it's resigning or looking to test the market?
I have zero sense, to be honest. And Draisaitl was pretty open during the year. He did an interview with Mark Spector of Sportsnet in January where he talked about, the affinity he felt for Edmonton, his desire to want to get the job done for that team. Obviously, he came within one goal or two goals, depending on how you look at it, one win of doing that alongside Connor McDavid, Zach Hyman, and Evan Bouchard, the rest of the Oilers. But, I don't know how, but he also mentioned in that interview that there's lots of things you have to consider. He's got to talk to his family. He's got to consider lifestyle things. I mean, it's not, I don't think there's any sense that he doesn't like Edmonton or anything like that, but this is a big decision, right? He'll be turning 30 pretty soon into when this extension would start. I would expect it to be a 7 or 8 year extension, basically maximum length or pretty close to it. And so this is a contract that will take him through the last of his best remaining years as an NHL player. And he has to decide, where does he want to do that? Is there anything else that's kind of in the back of his mind where he'd want to play? Does he want to be the frontline guy? Obviously with playing with Connor McDavid, he's always sort of going to be I'm not that he's second fiddle. I mean, look at the numbers the guys put up: 500-point seasons, 350 goals plus seasons. Had a really strong playoffs until getting injured, and I think that slowed down his production late in this playoff run. But there's a lot for him to work through, and so I don't know how getting so close and not quite getting over the top might or might not affect his thinking. But I would think that there's going to be some soul searching. And, I know the way the Oilers are viewing this is that this doesn't have to happen in the next week. I mean, July 1st is the first day he can sign extension, but that's not a deadline. That's the starting period for where I think discussions can pick up and they can work through it. So I would think that this is going to play out over many weeks, maybe even a month or more before there's clarity there. And ultimately, I think Leon has to decide what he wants to do. Because this is his best chance probably to sign a big contract, to set up where his next years are going to be, to figure out what he wants from his career. I can't imagine any of this hurt. It was unreal. I know you were in Edmonton, just seeing the excitement around that city, how close the team got. They've got some other decisions. Obviously, they've got UFAs like any team, so there's going to be a certain amount of turnover, but there's no reason to predict. The Oilers' key pieces are in place. I mean, you've got McDavid for 2 more years. You've got Hyman signed. Stuart Skinner is still coming into his own. There's a deal that Evan Bouchard is going to have to be signed, but he's a restricted free agent when his new contract is due. So, I think that there's the main pieces are in place. And so I have to believe Leon Draisaitl thinks he can win a cup in Edmonton because of how close they just were. And I don't think the window is closed by any stretch, but, there's lifestyle and family and all this other things that go into those decisions. And so we kind of have to wait and see where Leon winds up. And I think that's where the Oilers are at. I mean, they're waiting for him too. Obviously they just want to sign him. I don't think that it's not that the Oilers are exploring trades for him. It's just more, if he doesn't want to sign, I don't think they have any other choice, because they are worried about the so-called double whammy that could happen, where if Leon leaves and they don't make a trade for him, that maybe Connor McDavid could be leaving. And obviously that would be catastrophic the window would slam shut if that was the scenario that played out. And so this is going to be a fascinating one this offseason. And I'm sure we're not done talking about it.
Oh man. I mean, look, you would know more than me. I don't see it getting to that point where he gets moved, but we're talking about one of the biggest offseason stories ever. If it gets to a point where Leon Draisaitl, who's still a top 5 player in this league, somehow ends up on the move, that is definitely going to be a story we'll be monitoring here on the CJ Show.
But we have to underline.
I don't know if you have anything. Go ahead,
this is different.
please.
This is different than some other players. Like in the last few years, we've seen Boston take David Pastrnak into his last year. Last season, it was William Nylander in Toronto. It could be Mitch Marner this coming season in Toronto. Players that go into the last year. But Edmonton's a different place, right? It's the Oilers are very realistic that they're not probably going to be a top destination for free agents. They have to sort of keep their own and build their own. And so I don't think they can be as casual, or I don't think they can spin the dice and just be like, well, let's hope maybe he changes his mind in January. Like I think they at some point they will need a decision. Again, that's still a ways in the future here. I think that they can be a little bit patient. Given the season, everyone's got to process what just happened and take a breath and really, start to look ahead, because they've been so locked in the moment through this playoff run. But I don't think they can leave it unresolved into October. Again, it's not 100% chance they don't, but I think it's very likely it's going to come to a head at some point this summer. Either, are you signing? What does this contract look like? Let's start planning that way. Or if you're reluctant to do so, then we got to, weigh our options and see what else we can do.
Anything else you're hearing on some of the other pending UFAs in Edmonton?
Not a whole lot. I mean, they have a group of them, right? Connor Brown, Matthias Janmark, guys actually played very well for them in the Cup final. Corey Perry, Warren Fogle, Vincent Desharnais, who was in and out of the lineup in the playoffs. I think that they want to keep about 3 or 4 of those guys, but it's all going to come down to what the contract expectations are and if they can get to work on it. And frankly, those decisions, just by nature of the fact they can all be free agents as of Monday, that's what these next few days are, is the Oilers now go through their exit meetings, obviously have a chance for Jeff Jackson to start having those discussions in a meaningful way with the agents for those players. But I do think they want to retain some of those guys, but only at a certain price. And that's where a team like Edmonton, and I'm sure you're going to start asking me about Florida's UFAs not long after this. It's a natural segue that they are really at a disadvantage with the schedule, because obviously every other team that played their last game, whether it was a month ago, 2 months ago, even 2 weeks ago, has had a chance to get, through those discussions. I mean, there was no point in having them during the Cup final, because even if, the Oilers talked to the agents for those players, they knew the agents were going to go to the player in the middle of the Cup final. Hey, let's have a call between games 3 and 4 to weigh your options. I mean, it's just not something you can do. And so it's such a rush job now to see what they can get done. But certainly I know Edmonton likes a lot of those players and they're hoping to keep them.
Okay. You are right. My natural segue was to go to the Florida Panthers, specifically with Sam Reinhart. You talk about the champagne not even being dry in the Florida locker room. You guys didn't even let him get off the ice after he won the Stanley Cup before you were asking about his future, in which he said that he very much wants to stay in Florida. What's next with him?
Well, I think Florida does have an advantage being a team that can offer him an 8-year deal, whereas the open market, of course, will only yield 7. I think that they've put a pretty substantial offer in front of him for his camp already. This one feels, it's more reading the tea leaves. Like, I think there's certainly a point where Florida will walk away because they have to be smart. But I believe Sam Reinhart when he says, I want to stay, and when he's on the cup and saying this is, I think he said something along the lines of, this is the best place in the league to play. Obviously he's been part of that team making its rise and reaching the Cup final now in 2 straight years, winning it, the first championship this year. If he looks around and his, teammates are driving golf carts to the practice rink, they have a lot of their key pieces signed, it would be pretty hard to walk away from that. So I will never say never, but I do think if I had to sort of say what the most likely outcome in my senses is that he will stay. I think it's way more likely that Brandon Montour will hit the open market just because of what he can get out there. I mean, I'm hearing things like 7 times 7, or maybe even a little bit more than that for Brandon Montour. It's hard to imagine Florida giving him that sort of money just because, they signed Gustav Forsling to an 8-year, $5.75 million deal in March. And so, teams end up getting sort of internal structures. It'd be hard for me to imagine that they're going to give Montour that much of a delta above what they're paying Forsling, especially given that Forsling was their top defenseman throughout these playoffs and the season. So, I think when handicapping the situations in Florida, I think Reinhart, there's a good chance he stays, whereas Montour, he had a pretty nice celebration on the ice, but the opportunities ahead of him are pretty lucrative and I think would be difficult to pass up, at this stage of his career.
I have to double check this. I believe the Panthers parade is either Sunday or Monday, and a handful
Sunday.
of guys in that parade Sunday. Okay, so they'll at least have, still, that's so close to the free agent period starting and all of those decisions for Bill Zito to deal with. What a wild situation.
Yeah. It's unusual. Obviously, every team that wins a cup, usually players and sometimes marquee players are hitting the market, but usually there's 2 weeks of partying first, not 5 days, partying with the old teammates. But, I think everyone gets it. I mean, look, it's a business at the end of the day. And, it's not like the Panthers don't like Montour and Montour doesn't love Florida. I think it's just at a certain point when the money gets to, a level. I mean, there's just no way around the fact that players got to make the best decision for him and his family. So I don't think there'll be any hard feelings at that parade. I think most of Montour's teammates will be happy to see him, get the bag somewhere else. But it just feels as though that's where that's likely headed. And look, there's other guys like Oliver Ekman-Larsson, played very well for Florida in the playoffs. He's really resuscitated his career with this year in Florida. He told me on the ice he had about 5 or 6 options in free agency last year. He went to Florida. He's like, I made the right choice. But he signed a 1-year deal as a bit of a prove it situation for him after the way things ended for him in Vancouver. But I think you're going to see him getting 3- and 4-year offers on the open market. It's not to say that he's leaving Florida, but there's a very real opportunity or possibility of that. And so, man, in a cap league with this schedule, it's brutal. Like, favor those players while you have them, because 5 days, 6 days later, you're going to be seeing them pull on another team's sweater.
We're going to talk more about the Cup final a little later in the show. And for the Leafs contingent of people who listen, yes, we're going to have a Leafs corner. We still have a few more names to go through on what CJ is hearing. How about Jake Guentzel? Obviously went from Pittsburgh to Carolina. I saw Josh Yohe's article in the Athletic saying there might be a small chance he might want to come back to Pittsburgh, but it seems like he is going to test the open market.
I wouldn't go that far, actually. I think that there's still a couple days here before July 1st, and my sense is Carolina is still very much interested in retaining Guentzel. Similar to how I was talking about Sam Reinhart. I mean, they could get to an 8-year offer for Guentzel, which obviously no other team can, which just by virtue of the way the rules work. And so let's let this play out a little bit more. I mean, for Guentzel, it's a tough choice because he didn't choose to be traded to Carolina per se, right? That's just the way things went down at the deadline. He had a very productive time there. I think he liked his time there, but you've played this far and you're this close to free agency. Don't you want to at least peek into the open market, see what else might be out there, maybe choose your own destination? But at the same time, the Hurricanes, who have a lot of balls in the air with Pesce and Shea as free agents, with Teuvo Teravainen as a free agent, with Martin Necas on the trade market, a lot of turnover coming in Carolina. But I do think the Hurricanes are going to make a strong pitch still to retain Jake Guentzel. So, we'll have to see where that goes. I mean, if he hits the open market, I think Pittsburgh makes sense. There's been a lot to talk about Vancouver. I wonder about a team like Tampa. Someone whispered in my ear that maybe in a world potentially if Steven Stamkos was moving on, which is not clear yet, but that Guentzel could be a replacement there. Jake Guentzel is going to have a ton of options if he gets to July 1st and decides to test the market. But I'm not at a point where I'm ready to rule out the Hurricanes as a possible spot where he may in fact stay.
I mean, we got to throw Detroit in there too, and you could put that for Guentzel or for Steven Stamkos. Just you mentioning Stamkos made me think about the Detroit trade yesterday, in which Jake Wallman made the move to San Jose. Still wondering why they would do that, CJ. Why would Detroit make that?
It's obvious why they're doing it. They're clearing out cap space. What isn't obvious is how they intend to use that cap space. But to trade Jake Wallman, who was a top 6 player for them last year, to staple a 2nd-round pick to him, and as a sweetener to induce or entice the Sharks to take him at this point in time at full freight, right? There was no salary retained there. There's some whispers now as the buyout period is set to begin officially on Thursday in the NHL. It's going to be very small. Again, usually the buyout window lasts 10 days or 12 days, depending when the cup ends. This is all going to be a race between Thursday and Sunday where we're going to get buyouts, but there's some talk that the Red Wings might look to execute a buyout or two in this window. So, clearly they're clearing out space to be players either, both could be both the trade market and the free agent market. I would think there's a lot of reason if Stamkos hits July 1st, I could see a lot of reasons why that would be a fit for him and for them. Obviously a long, history of working with Steve Yzerman, the Red Wings GM, who was in Tampa for so long, pretty close to his hometown, probably a team that I think Stamkos and a lot of players would look at as, okay, maybe this is a team I can win a cup with in a couple of years' time, that they're building in the right direction. Clearly they're being quite aggressive. They also traded a player they took in the 2nd round last year to Nashville, on Tuesday, or was that Wednesday? What day is today? Today's Wednesday. On Tuesday, they traded a player they selected in the 2nd round and flipped them to Nashville to get the pick that they stapled to Wallman. I mean, Stevie Y is cooking there in Detroit, and we should very much keep our eyes on that situation because obviously it's a precursor to further moves to come. There's been some talk that maybe the Red Wings would look at John Gibson as an option, which is interesting, right? I mean, Gibson's name has been on the trade market, I'd say, for at least a year, if not 2. Anaheim has Lucas Dostal, who just won the gold medal for Czechia at the World Hockey Championship, had a nice season for the Ducks, and I think is clearly their goalie of the future. Would be a way to clear some money off the books for them, but also perhaps to, clear out some spots for Dostal to have more starts moving forward. And I think at this stage of John Gibson's career, I mean, he's been a workhorse for the Ducks over the years, but he's been there through some long years with some poorer and poorest defensive teams in front of him. I can only imagine he'd be at a stage where he'd welcome a chance to go play for a team with, higher aspirations in the short term. So, there's a lot going on out there. And it's been such a weird goalie market too, right? We've already seen 4 goaltenders traded. I mean, the carousel is swinging. Have a new trade board coming out for the Athletic today. And, in the top, 10 or 15, I don't have it right in front of me. You've got Philip Gustafson, the goaltender in Minnesota. You've got Tristan Jarry, whose name is out there. You've got Gibson on that list. UC Saros is a little lower. I'm not sure that Nashville is going to move him, but there's a lot swinging behind the scenes, and I think that's tied to the fact that free agency doesn't have the front line top of the rotation starters available so much. So anyway, I'm going in all directions here, Julian. Focus me, young man.
Linus Ullmark, who was just traded to the Ottawa Senators, had a little Zoom avail with media today. He said, really interesting from him, Ottawa was not on his list of teams in his no trade clause, so he had no problem going to the Ottawa Senators. But what about an extension for him?
You can't rule it out. I think that both he and the team are comfortable letting this one breathe a little bit, let him get situated in the city. One thing about Ullmark is, it's been described to me that he's very much sort of he's a kind of a quiet family man type of person. I think he's mindful of getting his family in the best possible position. And so maybe that's why a place like Ottawa could be appealing. I mean, certainly a great place to live. Again, a team that if they get things right, they should be on the up because a lot of their players are in the right window where you expect them to get better. And so if that ends up being a good fit, if he has a good year, if it works from him from a family perspective, I would certainly think he would look at staying there because I do think on the surface it makes a lot of sense. But, no one is rushing into that, either the team or him. And the Senators were comfortable making the deal, knowing that, they've got to win him over a little bit too. And obviously want to, they want to get they want to see what they have in him as well. I mean, there's some risk in that trade. I mean, obviously Joonas Korpisalo had a difficult year there in Ottawa, but with them retaining 25%, look, I don't pretend to know goalies. Goalies are voodoo to me a little bit. It's hard to, you could just see who's stopping the puck and who's not. But I had someone I trust in the goalie world say that he believes that Korpisalo is a pretty good bet to have a rebound, especially playing behind Swayman. You would expect he's more of a 30-game kind of guy in that situation. And he was saying that Ullmark may regress. That so on the surface, I think a lot of people are saying, "Wow, Boston only got that for but they did get a first-round pick, and they may have got a goaltender who gives them a pretty capable, number 2 option while getting rid of Ullmark a year before he could have left in free agency anyway. So, in the moment, sometimes the way we react to these trades, it looks a little different 6 or 12 months later. Let's see how this one goes. I was of the mind, like many, like, oh, wow, this is a no-brainer for Ottawa. But, you have to remember that Bruins team that Ullmark played behind, pretty stout defensive team. He had three really strong years there, but it's a different animal what he's stepping to in Ottawa, where I think that they're still looking to solidify themselves defensively to a certain degree. But he's probably going to be facing a little different and more frequent quality of shots than he did in his last stop.
Okay. What about Jeff Skinner? It looks as if his time in Buffalo will come to an end.
Yeah, he's been out there on the trade market. With obviously Buffalo preferring to deal him away if possible, rather than going the buyout option. I mean, he does have a no movement clause, so it's a difficult trade to execute. A no movement clause doesn't prevent a player from being bought out, and so the expectation is very strongly that either way his time in Buffalo is going to end, and it might be imminent now with this buyout period opening on Thursday, and the Sabres so far not being able to move on from him. And, that would make sense if you're in Jeff Skinner's camp. I mean, why, unless you're really getting traded somewhere 100% you want to play, why not just not waive the no move? You get bought out, you get paid 66% of what you're remaining. And I think it's a reasonable bet. Then you become a unrestricted free agent. You get to choose your next home, and you can probably make up the 34 or 33.33333% of your contract that is lost in the buyout with the next contract. So, I would expect here, as much as we have the free agent lists and we've had a free agent board already go out, we're going to see a number of names added to that board because there's going to be buyouts. And then there's also qualifying offers due to restricted free agents on Sunday. And I think, as in past years, teams are going to, there'll be some surprisingly good players that become UFAs because they didn't get, qualified by their team. And that usually happens in a case where a team's a little nervous about what a player might get in arbitration. That, teams don't like to go to arbitration typically with players. Obviously, players don't like that process either. It can be nasty, and you're leaving it up to a third party, in this case, the arbitrator, to dictate what the next contract looks like. But, in these next few days, Jeff Skinner would be one I would expect will be added, but possibly a few others to the, to the number of free agents that are available.
Next on the list, Oliver Kylington. I tried to do some digging in this for myself. It seems as if both sides, between the Flames and Kylington, are still trying to discuss a contract. I think a lot of fans are wondering why it's taken a bit of time. What insight have you heard?
I haven't heard a lot on this file, to be honest. I mean, the reason it's taken a bit of time is because he can be a UFA, right? I mean, that's even when you've had the situation that Kylington has, and obviously hasn't played a lot in recent years and last season, he still has a chance to go and sign with any other team if the Flames don't give him the kind of offer he wants. And so that, that's decidedly in the player's favor, I would say. The team can try to play hardball or what have you, but I don't have a whole lot. I didn't realize we are going to talk about him, but so to be honest, I don't know a whole lot about the specifics of his situation, but team has to compel you not to become a free agent when you get this close to July 1st. And that, we've seen a few do that. I mean, just on this day, Liam O'Brien signed a 3-year extension with Utah, which obviously played last season in Arizona. He signs his deal. Dylan DeMello signed a 4-year contract in Winnipeg when he could have been a UFA. He got a pretty good premium. He got $4.9 million against the cap, which probably wasn't necessarily going to be out there in free agency. And so, I don't think it's personal when you get to this point, but if you're Kylington or any other UFA, if you're Tyler Myers in Vancouver, it sounds like Tyler is a good bet now not to stay with the Canucks. I know he wanted to, but it doesn't sound like the talks that they've had have been productive towards getting a deal. And so when it's only a few days away, I mean, what's a few more days to see what the market might be out there for you? So, I would think Kylington, that kind of sums up where he's at, is just the Flames have to give him a reason to stay. And that would be probably security and money that they might not be willing to give out at this point in time, because they're also looking at the market and saying, well, we have other options if not you.
Man, I if I'm a betting man, I think he ends up staying, just because I know the Flames are ultimately going to need defensemen anyway. I don't see it getting to a point where it drags on for a really long time, but we'll have to wait and see on that one, Siege. Anything else from any of the pending UFAs or anything you're hearing? We're trying to get that out now.
I mean, there's a lot swirling around. Detroit is a situation a lot of people are obviously focused on. I've heard the Rangers are trying to move a defenseman, maybe perhaps to set up. A lot of the reasons the trades happen now, I mean, it's because there's, the draft is here, so teams like to get a pick they can make right away. It's also because free agency's coming, and sometimes it's clearing money out, which, I think explains a trade like the Jake Wallman deal Detroit made. I think the Rangers are looking at a similar type of move, one of their defensemen. I mean, a lot of talk that Jacob Trouba could be the odd man out there. Not because he's disliked or anything, but he's almost a luxury at this point in time. They have Adam Fox and Braden Schneider, who are also right shots, who play above him. Trouba's making $8 million on the cap. Do you really want to have that much money invested in what is, effectively a third pairing defenseman for them at this point? He also has a contract that's a no move clause, but it becomes a 15-team no trade on July 1st on Monday. So, I think that there's also that dynamic. So that's something to keep an eye on. Carolina, I think, is going to be a very active team just because of the number of free agents they potentially have walking out the door, plus the Natchez trade that they continue to work on. The Jets, we have to see what happens in Winnipeg with the Rutger McGroarty situation. Also, Nikolai Ehlers' name being out there with him 1 year out from potential unrestricted free agency. It's always about the Leafs around here, I guess. So you like to pin at Leafs corner. So, important week for them where, we'll get a little clarity, I would think, with Brad Treliving speaking to the media later today on where things exactly stand with Mitch Marner, how he plans to approach revamping his blue line. I think that they'll be looking for 2 right shots in free agency, or maybe trying to get one by trade, but certainly adding 2 more right shot defensemen to their group here in the next week or so. I don't even know what else, man. My phone's been on fire since I got to Vegas here late last night. So I'm just going stream of consciousness right now. But that's some of what I've been hearing, and obviously we'll keep you. I don't know when we'll do our next show. Maybe there'll be an emergency pod if something big enough necessitates it with us both once you get down here to Vegas this week. But it's a great time of year. If you like transactions, this is a very compact and crazy week. I don't know how many trades we'll see. There's obviously going to be a few more. I think sometimes we overhype the trades at the draft, but certainly I expect 3 or 4 trades of some level of significance, and then obviously a whole slew of more minor deals that go down, plus the buyouts, plus free agency opening. Plus, hey, there's actually a few teenagers being drafted to some teams this week too that are going to be players that will be worth following here for the next number of years.
Man, could you imagine if you were a draft prospect expert too?
I'm glad I'm not. I mean, there's only so many days in the week. I'm happy to leave that to the Scott Wheelers and Corey Pronmans of the world. Bob McKenzie still puts out his definitive list for TSN. I quite honestly, there will be someone selected in the top 10 that I will not know that person's name heading in. I know that's embarrassing to admit. I did meet 4 of the prospects during the Cup final, and really, really nice, actually really nice kids. And so I'll be excited to see, what becomes of them this week. But my goodness, it's quite a week in hockey this week.
Yeah, I'll be joining you in Vegas later tonight. And as you we kind of sort of alluded to with next week, Monday, I believe that's TSN. It's when everyone's going to be doing their free agent frenzy shows. So since Siege will be deep in that, don't expect a show on Monday. You'll know very soon about when our next episode is. Did you fully
Tuesday?
empty the
Tuesday
tank
makes sense. We haven't.
Probably, yeah.
We haven't coordinated with producer Nick and you, but I would think it makes sense because so much of the action happens on the first day. I say like Tuesday morning, we just go back on. We sort of reset where are we at, who's left to sign, what are we hearing there, and sum up the day that was. But I mean, there's no point in doing it on July 1st. It'll be going to be a shit show. That's my official term for it. It's going to be a shit show.
I like that. Did you empty all that you could on Leafs Corner? Just want to make sure we cover that base so that way people like Sid Sixero don't come at us for not satisfying conditions of Leafs Corner.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like Tyler Bertuzzi is likely to test the market at this point. Not totally clear on Max Domi. There's sort of mixed signals there. I think that certainly Max Domi is a pending UFA, naturally liked his time in Toronto, has a long history to organization. I don't know that the contract talks have got to a point where there's anything to compel him to stay. I mean, he's looking for some security, right? I would think it would take a 3, maybe 4-year deal at minimum to compel him to sign before July 1st. I don't think the door is totally closed there yet, but there's a lot of other players around. It won't surprise you to know that Chris Tanev is a player of significant interest to the Leafs, given the history there with Brad Treliving, the fact that they were connected to him pretty prominently before he was dealt to Dallas last season. I think the Leafs are willing to get creative on a contract with Tanev, even despite his age and some of his injury history. You might see him sign a longer-term extension or longer-term contract with wherever he lands. And, that could be a way to lower the AAV slightly. Obviously for him, it's huge security, but it's kind of interesting that what did he sign, a 4-year deal when he was a free agent moving from Vancouver to Calgary? Like, I don't think you can rule out a 5 or 6 year deal for him in free agency this time around. And I think Toronto is going to be one of the teams that are knocking on his door, but they're far from alone. A lot of players, a lot of teams out there like the player, and so does the Dallas Stars, where he finished last season. I think they're going to try to, keep upping their efforts to sign him as well. So, that's someone to watch for the Leafs. In goal, sounds like Kevin Weeks first reported that there's a year out, an extension in the offing for Joseph Woll, that would just be a pure bet at this point. If that ends up coming in a 3 or 4 year deal, a year out from when his contract expires, that's betting that it's smarter to sign him and give him that security now, give him peace of mind, and that the best is yet to come for a guy who's had some pretty big highs, I'd say. Like his top end in Toronto has been very enticing, but obviously dealt with some injury issues, wasn't able to play Game 7 against Boston. It's something the organization wants to get to the bottom of. And in terms of free agents, I think Laurent Brossoit and Anthony Stolarz are two players that the Leafs are looking at quite prominently to maybe be, run in tandem with Woll next season. On the blue line, Matthew Roy is someone that they have some interest in. I don't think Sean Walker maybe is as much of a fit. Don't think Pesci's a fit to the same degree, but we'll have to see where the dominoes fall. You go into July 1st with a plan, and then everyone signs somewhere else. Then you got to alter the plan. So the fact that the Leafs need 2 defensemen, I'm sure in a perfect world for them, it's like Tanev and Roy, but the world might not be perfect. And so if they don't get those guys, they'll have to look at some of the other options available.
So much to get through with all this offseason talk. We didn't even mention Marty Necas, who we've mentioned on previous episodes, but we haven't even discussed his situation. There's the Matvei Michkov situation in Philadelphia, where it looks like he's going to be signing with the team in a matter of a couple days.
Coming.
We were talking about yeah, for sure. We were talking about the Edmonton Oilers just now, and we haven't even talked about what's next for Ken Holland, the GM of the team, who's in his final year of his deal. Like, there's just so much to go through this offseason, and stuff we didn't even get to touch on today. My head is spinning after that entire segment. I can't imagine what you're going through.
Well, good thing I'm on my second coffee in the morning here, so I'm
only your second.
Only my second. Well, it's still relatively early in Vegas, and I got my run in this morning, so I'm on the good side of it right now. But Ken Holland, look, he signed a 5-year deal. The 5-year deal expires on Monday. It sounds like at this point he's not going to come down to the draft. I think the Oilers are interested in keeping both him and Bob Nicholson, who have been with the organization for a while, maybe in slightly different roles, different titles than where they've been. And, I don't know if those guys are going to take those jobs or how that's going to shake out, but there's still those discussions ongoing. I would expect for the near term that Jeff Jackson, who's the president of the team, will effectively be the general manager. Sort of heading up the hockey decisions, the hockey operations department. Obviously, he's been heavily involved, having worked there now for the last year. And, we'll see how things shake down, because again, those are conversations that weren't happening during the playoff run. So now they're starting, and, I don't want to jump to the conclusions about what may or may not happen, because, there's just not, the decisions haven't been reached yet.
If there's one thing we don't do on this show, is jump to conclusions.
We probably do. We do. We're guilty of it. It's always like, what's going to happen?
It's a joke. It's a joke. Yeah, you're right. Okay. I think we've done as much as we can in terms of the rumblings and the speculation. Can we take a moment and just look back at what was a brilliant Stanley Cup final series? Ends in 7. The Florida Panthers are Stanley Cup champions. They don't get reverse swept. Phew, on that point. Your thoughts on the Game 7 that was, and the everything just around it?
Well, I'm not a please like my sport guy, but I must say it is gratifying to see the TV numbers both in the US and Canada reflect, what I on the ground thought was a fantastic final. I know there were some lopsided scores in that series, but it was compelling as hell. Storylines galore. The Game 7 from a hockey standpoint, to me, like that is like what makes our game great. I know, as much as we all might like a 6-5 game, a 2-1 Game 7 is kind of what you expect, right? I mean, Pittsburgh-Detroit 2009 was a 2-1 Game 7. Those teams, both, like the players on both sides, just battled their asses off. Nothing came easily. Obviously, there weren't many power plays in the game, which you would kind of expect for that moment. And, it's one bounce or one shot difference. Stuart Skinner might prefer to have this Sam Reinhart goal back, where he scores off the rush kind of on a play that, looked relatively innocent. But at the flip side, you tip your cap. Zach Hyman at the side of the goal. Connor McDavid had chances, in the third period, and the combination of Bobrovsky and Eetu Leifsterainen and the sprawling Panthers found a way to keep that out. And man, it was just tight and tense. The building was just like, oh, like I can still kind of feel it a couple days later in my soul, just the way that game felt. I mean, the stakes are so high, and it was pretty cool being on the ice afterwards and seeing the emotions spill out. Actually, I had a chance to meet Paul Maurice's son, Luke, who says he listens to our podcast. He's in his studies at law school. He's in his studies at law school down there in Miami, but said that he's a fan of the Short Kings on the podcast. So shout out if you're hearing this, Luke. I hope you had fun. I actually told him to mix in a water, which Julian, is a advice I've dispensed to you. Because, I mean, look at it. It was right at the start, and he was like, wow, Chris Johnston just told me to mix in a water. But I do think it's important advice right before you go into what I can only imagine the next 24, 48 hours of his life look like after that. It was pretty cool to see his dad, too, lift the Stanley Cup. I mean, if anyone, might have been the most emotional scene is Paul Maurice, the way the look on his face, the interview he gave to Kyle Bukauskas, talking about his own family, his own history, his own journey to win that cup. Sacha Barkov, the first Finnish captain, got a call from the Finnish president after that. That's wow. Finland's a real hockey country, and took a call from the president after to congratulate him and the other Finns, Lundell and Luosterainen, Ruutu on their coaching staff on the team. It was a great final. And one of the coolest moments, Julian, quite honestly, is people might not realize, but Patrick Hornqvist remains, I think he's called a consultant and scout for the Panthers, won 2 cups as a player with the Penguins, was part of Florida's turnaround, and obviously sort of gets a third in the administrative side. I stopped him on the ice and was just kind of asking about the Panthers turnaround. He said, I think losing last year made a big difference. And then he, on his own volition, said, and I think Connor McDavid is now going to win a Stanley Cup for having been through this. He's like, you can't really tell someone about this or teach them. You can't use words to describe, but like once you feel this, once you've been in the moment, he's like, you just have a little bit extra to give, in terms of wanting so badly to win it in the future. And he was predicting on the ice while the Panthers celebrated around us that we would be seeing a Connor McDavid Cup down the road. And so, I think it sets up a pretty compelling story in Edmonton is now McDavid and Draisaitl's chase continues to try to get back to the top of the mountain after being so close. So, I thought it was a great series. I stand by my decision as one of 17 Conn Smythe voters, despite all the shit online about Connor McDavid's selection as the number 1 Conn Smythe pick.
Damn, okay. That was a feisty. You damn, okay. It's feisty. It was very feisty of you to go in that way.
I'll say this: any fans who are second guessing it, I got no problem with you. But a lot of our colleagues around the league are sitting at home on their couch second guessing. I don't know why. I mean, the guy he had 20 more points than any Panthers player. He set and eclipsed records by guys by the name of Gretzky and Lemieux. There's no chance to even get to game 6 and 7 without him. I recognize he did not score a point in either of those games, but it's a 2-month award. And I just have a hard time looking over that 2 months and saying that anyone was more valuable in the playoffs than McDavid was. End of story, full stop. And you can quibble with the second and third place votes. The only thing I'll say there is we've already highlighted a couple times on the pod. The votes go in before the final buzzer. So it's a hard thing. Like I voted before I saw Bob make, those game-saving stops in the third period. There's a chance maybe he gets my third place vote instead of Gustav Forsling. I had Barkov second and McDavid first. But all being said, I still think we got the right winner. I got no problem with Connor McDavid, by the way, if anyone cares, not coming out to take the trophy. I think that's a picture you don't want to exist forever. I mean, you look at the J.S. Jaguar one, he just looks miserable from 2003 when he had to come back out. That was a time where obviously he was focused on the team. We saw Connor McDavid stand on the ice and fist bump or tap each of his teammates as they went off. He was the last Oiler to leave the ice and to come back on and accept an individual award right before the Panthers got the cup. It just wouldn't have felt right. So anyway, I just saw all this shit online and it bothered me. It's like from people who should know better. I mean, again, there's reasonable disagreement. I'm not saying, but I can't believe how many people are like, he shouldn't have won. Like, what universe are you on? Step back and look at it. That was a pretty special playoffs. I mean, I've never, to my knowledge, I don't think I've ever voted for a player on a losing team. But this was a player on a losing team in Game 7 in a 2-1 game. Like his team, the Oilers had 5 more goals in the series than the Panthers did, which I realize doesn't win you anything. We've seen other cup winners. St. Louis scored less goals than Boston the year they won. Pittsburgh less than Detroit in 2009 when they won. Like, it's not unprecedented, but I'm just saying the margins were pretty thin on this one. And in that case, I'm comfortable voting for a player on a losing team because he was that special.
You sat on this. You stewed on this for a couple days.
Dude.
It wasn't like, I'm not gonna say it was genuine anger. Damn, yeah.
And I'm just seeing all this shit, and I'm like, yeah, I wish I was sitting at home the last 2 months and on my couch and just being like, man.
Yo, okay. Here's the thing. For the record, I don't disagree with Connor McDavid winning. I think if I was in the building, I would still lean that way. I would strongly think about Barkov and Bobrovsky's cases, obviously just looking at how that game unfolded. But you're right. Like, Connor McDavid was within a stone's throw of establishing a new record for points in one single postseason and was one game away. I get it. He didn't get points in game 6 or game 7, but was one win away from accomplishing something that hadn't been done in over 80 years. Like, and you could, and with the way Leon Draisaitl, the time it took for him to get into the series, you could say that was him. Like, I totally understand why you went that way.
And let's use the argument against the people. And obviously, we don't want to. I'm wasting too much time on this. But he had 4 more points than any player on other team in the series, in the final itself. And you say, okay, well, Barkov. Well, Barkov didn't produce a lot in the final. I actually thought he played really well, and especially in the losing effort in Game 6, he was by far Panthers' best player to me. Bobrovsky got pulled in a game in the series. His numbers he actually had a negative goal saved above expected mark in that final series. He was fantastic against the Rangers the previous round, but he had some ups and downs in the playoffs. Like, to use only that McDavid didn't have a point in game 6 and 7 against him is ignoring the fact that the other players that you're suggesting we should have voted over him all had perfect series or perfect playoffs or perfect game 6s and 7s. It's just not, it's not a fact. And so that's all I'll say on the matter, because people are here for rumors and trades. They're not here for my rants, but I just was really surprised and annoyed by our colleagues coming at us. Again, fans, you got a clean slate. But like some of the I know betters sitting at home didn't appreciate it.
Sorry, the I know betters. The only way this rant would have been more fiery is if you just started name dropping people. Just be like, you think you know better? That's the and I know you're not that type of guy. You would never do that. But if you did do that, you would be standing on business, as we say. That would be hilarious. I get exactly why you feel the way that you feel, CJ.
Well, this is how the players feel. This is how the players feel when the media second guess them, right? Like, I remember John Tavares. Mm-hmm. He has that. It's like the famous quote about like being on the playing field. Like, you're in the game and other people who aren't in the game are second guessing you. Like, that's kind of how I feel. Like, obviously I wasn't in the playing field playing in the cup final, but I'm going through all that travel. I'm working my butt off. I'm spending a tremendous amount of time thinking about that decision. I'm calling people or texting with people who are with the teams to gauge who they think their best players were. Like, and then someone who's not in the playing field, someone who's not in the game, someone who isn't jet lagged and not sleeping is just like, should have been this instead. That's where it got me. The man in the arena, okay. I think it's called. Do you know that quote? I think it's called the man in the arena.
I've vaguely heard about that.
It's really basically like, you got to be in the game to really know and to understand. And it is true, because frankly, some of our job is the second guess players. And like, obviously you or I couldn't, we have no place on the playing field with any of these athletes. We've never done anything like them. We've never been under the pressures they've been under. We've never performed in front of 20,000 people. Like, it is true. So I get the irony that I'm bitching about this, and yet for a living, it's my job to second guess people doing something I couldn't do.
Okay. Let me take you to another topic. Any quick thoughts on the Hall of Fame class that was announced yesterday? Pavel Datsyuk, Jeremy Roenick, Shea Weber, Natalie Darwitz, Chrissy Wendell-Pohl, Colin Campbell, and David Poile will be in the incoming class for the Hockey Hall of Fame.
I don't have a lot of thoughts. I'll let someone else drag that. Like, it's a decision made by 18 people behind closed doors. I don't know really what goes into it. I know that they have to get, I think, 14 out of 18 votes for each candidate to be confirmed. I'll just say this. I'm surprised. I'm a little surprised, but not shocked. Like, I didn't know if the sort of Russia-Ukraine situation would have the committee of a mind to put a Russian in. I'm not at all debating Pavel Datsyuk's Hall of Fame credentials, but I was I found that interesting that they didn't, and then that they put him in and didn't put Alex McGillney in for the 15th straight year is beyond me. But I don't, this doesn't get me too fired up either way. If you have any thoughts, you can share them.
I think McGillney should be in there, man. Yeah, that's a big one. There's again, I've said it before on to different friends, but I'll say it publicly here. I'm pretty sure I probably said on the podcast too. There should be no limit on the amount of women who get in. So to not see people like Jennifer Botterill and Julie Chu make it or have them wait longer to get in, that's ridiculous too. Seeing the discourse around Colin Campbell getting in, all I'll just say about that is very fascinating and interesting to me. That's as much as I'm willing to say on that. Man, there was so much stuff this week. We didn't even get to. I mean, I could say this as a cross check if you think that's appropriate to do. We didn't even talk about the Arizona Coyote situation devolving as it did with Alex Morello. Literally moments after the Stanley Cup final is done, it's announced that he's stepping away from his ownership of the team. I'm sorry. This is such a ridiculous situation. And the fact that it ended as it did, it's just like, I'm sorry. Like I asked the questions about it when we first talked about that situation. It seemed weird to me in the light. And now we're at this situation. I just think it's embarrassing that it's got to that point.
I guess he got his money though. So this is
that's
entirely
it. That's why it's embarrassing. That's exactly why it's embarrassing. He got his money at the end of all of this.
I'll just say though that it's entirely predictable this would fall apart. I'm not saying I predicted it would fall apart in a couple months. I thought there might be let's face it. I thought it was going to go to that land auction, which was originally scheduled for the 27th, which is tomorrow. And I thought he wouldn't win the land auction and then it would fall apart. So I guess I did think it would be on something like this timeline. I mean, the whole thing was a ruse, whatever. Let's move on. The good news is that now it clears the way, hopefully, for, something to be built properly there. The NHL, I'll say, is really lucky that Ryan Smith was there in the offing, that he offered such a great and appealing opportunity for them in Utah. It shows. I mentioned Liam O'Brien signing. He was a fan favorite with the Coyotes. The fact he's, the spicy tuna. Remember, he gave a pretty good speech when they went and visited Utah for the first time, the players, and the fact he's signing on. I mean, I think that the players are energized by the new opportunity with the Utah Hockey Club, and I do think we'll see NHL hockey in Arizona in the future, but the building's got to get built and owners got to emerge, and all that's going to take time. And Alex Morello will just go down as another name that we almost forgot we ever knew within, 6 hours from now, because I'm done with that story.
Yeah. Do you have a stick tap before we wrap up?
I'll take Kyle.
I have one.
I mean,
no, nice. I like that one.
I say this respectfully because I'm older than him, but he's the old guy without a cup that got his cup. It was pretty cool seeing him and his son on the ice. I had a chance to chat with him a little bit. Just what a grateful guy for his career. I thought he had really kind of a wise answer to a question I asked him. He was saying that he's as appreciative of the hard moments where he was a long way from winning a cup as he is of that moment of sort of ultimate redemption, jubilation, finally winning a cup, after all those seasons in Buffalo where he was nowhere close to it and, believed in himself, found a way to contribute, as a depth player on the Panthers. And, he's going to make a decision here about his future, but whether he decides to retire or come back, he goes out on top. And I thought, just a class guy for a lot of years in the NHL, 17 NHL seasons, and was really happy to, as I am every year. I mean, as you know, I'm not cheering for teams of these things, but there's always individuals that you're happy to see get the cup. As I mentioned earlier, happy to see Paul Maurice raise the cup. Happy to see Oliver Ekman-Larsson, another guy who's always just been great to deal with over the years, and then Kyle Pozo as well.
Awesome. I like that stick tap for him. I'm going to give mine to Pavel Datsyuk, one of the members I mentioned who will be going into the Hockey Hall of Fame. We remember him for the Stanley Cups he won. We remember him for his defensive play, 3 Selke trophies. What I do hope people should do, if you don't already do it, just type in Pavel Datsyuk on YouTube and just watch him break all the ankles possible. Friend of the show, Dmitry Filipovich, actually a couple years ago did a little mixtape. You get a little watch on Twitter with all the times he's made all these incredible moves. It's just to see a player like him be recognized and be entered into the Hall of Fame. I like that. I think he was one of the coolest players to watch from the 2000s, and to see him be a part of that Hall of Fame class, I have no problem with that. So I will give him my stick tap for this week.
Yeah, bud. Well said.
Right.
What an
All right.
episode. Can't wait for the next one. It's all happening.
I was about to say, yeah, seriously, if it's going to be anywhere near as fiery as this one is, you're in for a good one. Get your questions in now, whether on Discord or Twitter. No episode Monday. Expect Tuesday to be the next time you hear from the CJ
I don't
show.
know. I'm telling
I got to get on a plane.
I think
Oh.
I think we might have an
You think
emergency
there could be
one
something
between
else?
now and then. Yeah, I just think something's going to happen that might, even if it's a quickie or something. Well, we're not going to forget about you out there. We're going to do as much as we can.
Well, if it comes to that, it probably means it will come at you from Vegas when we will both be in Vegas. Anyway, thanks so much for listening. We'll be back when we'll be back.
The Chris Johnston Show. Inside the game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.